turned wedding hall. His wheelchair sat in a patch of shadow where no one had to look at him. The music was lively, boots stomping, skirts twirling, people laughing, celebrating a beautiful day. Justice felt none of it. He had worn the same black suit he used to wear when riding into Helena to negotiate horse sales. Back then, he walked into every room, tall and sure of himself. Back then, his name meant something. Now people whispered it the way folks whisper about a man they pity. Justice Garrett, 35, owner of the Triple Bar G Ranch, richer than almost any cattleman in Montana Territory, and unable to take 3 steps on his own. The accident had happened 18 months ago, but some days it still felt like yesterday. One wrong move on a wild stallion, one violent fall, one crack in his spine that stole everything he thought made him a man, his strength, his certainty, his future. He adjusted the wheels of his chair, trying to ignore the sound of nearby women giggling. They weren't laughing at him, he told himself, but the thought still stung. He forced a polite smile when they glanced his way, but the moment their eyes fell on the chair, their expressions shifted. Sad, uncomfortable, avoiding. Justice turned his face toward the hay-scented breeze drifting in from the open barn door. He didn't even want to be here, but sitting alone at home was worse. So he came, hoping maybe being around people would ease the hollow ache in his chest. It didn't. Across the hall, a little boy tugged at his mother's sleeve. Justice recognized her vaguely, a woman he'd seen around town but never spoken to. Her dark hair was pinned up neatly, and her simple gray dress looked well cared for despite its age. She wasn't like the fancy women dancing in bright colors. She looked like someone life had tested more than once. The boy whispered something to her. She shook her head. He whispered again, more urgently. Justice looked away, not wanting to intrude. The music shifted to a gentle waltz. Couples moved easily across the floor, the kind of dance Justice once excelled at. He swallowed hard. He hadn't danced since the accident. The idea alone twisted something inside him. He reached for his drink, but before his hand touched the cup, a shadow appeared across the table. Justice looked up. The woman from across the hall stood there. The widow. Up close, she was even prettier, though not in a flashy way. Her eyes were steady and warm, her posture nervous but brave. "Mr. Garrett?" she asked softly. He blinked in surprise. "Ma'am?" She exhaled as if gathering every bit of courage she had. Then she leaned closer, her voice low so only he could hear. "Dance with me." Justice froze. He must have misheard. No woman had asked him to dance since before the accident. Most avoided him. Some pitied him. But this was different. There was sincerity in her eyes. Not pity. Not fear. "I can't walk," he said quietly. "I know," she replied, "but you can move your chair, and I can follow." Justice felt heat rise in his chest. "Why would you ask me?" Her gaze softened. "Because you look like a man who could use someone standing beside him for a moment. And because my son over there," she nodded toward the boy, "said the saddest man in the room deserves the first dance." Justice swallowed hard. It felt like something cracked inside him, something tightly locked for far too long. She extended her hand. Her hand was small and work-worn, but steady as she waited. Hope and fear tangled inside him. People were watching. The whispers were already starting. His pride begged him to refuse, to avoid the embarrassment. But then he saw the boy across the room. The child's expression was hopeful, almost pleading. Justice placed his hand in hers. Her smile lit up the space between them. She stepped aside as Justice turned his chair toward the dance floor. The crowd shifted instinctively, unsure, curious, doubtful. Justice felt every gaze like a weight on his shoulders, his heart pounding in his ears. But then, the widow, Irene, he remembered someone calling her, placed her hand on his shoulder. She moved slowly, guiding her steps to match the rhythm of his wheels. Justice found himself turning, adjusting, letting the chair glide with the music. People stared, but the music changed something. The way it filled the room, the way Irene moved beside him, the way she trusted him without question. For the first time in 18 months, Justice didn't feel broken. He felt present, like he belonged in the world again. Irene's skirt brushed against his knee. Her hand stayed firm and warm on his shoulder. She smiled at him. Not a polite smile, but a real one, the kind that made a man feel seen. The waltz rose to its gentle peak. Justice turned his chair in a slow circle, guiding Irene as she followed his lead. When the music ended, she stepped in front of him and bowed her head lightly, as if the moment had meaning for her too. Silence filled the barn. Then someone clapped, then another, and suddenly the whole hall erupted into applause. Justice's throat tightened. Irene squeezed his hand once before stepping back, her eyes shining. "Thank you," she whispered. He couldn't speak. Not yet. Something inside him was shifting, waking, and for the first time in far too long, Justice Garrett felt alive. The applause still echoed in Justice's ears long after the music faded. People returned to their conversations, but now they looked at him differently. Not with pity, not with discomfort, with surprise, with curiosity. Some even smiled. Justice wasn't sure what to do with that. Irene touched his shoulder gently. "Come sit with us," she said, "if you want to." He hesitated. It had been a long time since anyone invited him to sit anywhere. Usually folks avoided the awkwardness. But Irene didn't wait for him to decide. She walked beside him toward a quiet corner of the barn, where her son perched on a stool, swinging his small boots and grinning like he'd won the lottery. "Terry," she said softly, "say hello to Mr. Garrett." Terry hopped down, puffed his little chest, and extended his hand. "Sir, that was the best dance I ever saw." Quote, Justice shook his hand, surprised by the boy's confidence. "Thank you, Terry." "My ma was nervous," Terry said proudly, "but I told her she could do it." And she did. Irene covered her face for a second, embarrassed. "Children have no fear," she muttered. "They also tell the truth," Justice said. "And your son is right. You danced beautifully." Irene's eyes met his, and something warm flickered there, something that made Justice's heart beat faster than it had in months. They talked until the music ended for good, and people began leaving in pairs and families. Justice didn't want the night to end. He didn't want to go back to his silent ranch house with nothing but shadows and memories for company. Before he could think too hard, the offer slipped out. "May I drive you home?" Quote, Irene blinked. You wouldn't mind?" "Not at all," Justice said. "I'd like to." Terry clapped his hands once. "We can ride in a rich man's wagon tonight?" "Terry," Irene scolded, mortified. But Justice only chuckled. He's not wrong. Outside, the night was cold and crisp. The autumn stars shone bright above the valley, and the wind whispered through the cottonwoods like an old friend with a story to tell. Justice's wagon sat nearby, fitted with a ramp so he could drive with hand reins. Folks stared again when he loaded himself into the seat, but he ignored them. As they rode toward the small cabin near Trout Creek, Terry talked the whole way about fishing, about a rabbit he'd seen, about how he wanted to learn to ride like a real cowboy someday. Justice listened, amused, occasionally glancing at Irene beside him. Her hands were folded in her lap, and the faint moonlight made her profile look soft and thoughtful. When they reached the cabin, Justice felt something tug deep inside him. He didn't want this moment to end. Irene stepped down from the wagon first, then lifted Terry. She hesitated before turning to Justice. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for tonight." Justice swallowed. "Thank you." "For everything." Irene looked down, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't usually do things like that." "Like asking strangers to dance?" he teased gently. "Like being brave," she corrected. "I'm not brave." Justice shook his head. "Ma'am, you walked across a room full of people to talk to a man everyone else ignored. That's bravery." Irene's eyes softened. She reached out as if to touch his arm, but then pulled her hand back quickly, unsure. Still, the moment lingered between them like a spark. "Good night, Justice," she said, using his first name for the first time. "Good night, Irene." Her smile was small, shy, beautiful. Justice rode away slowly, savoring every second of the night air. He replayed the dance over and over, replayed her smile, replayed the hope in her eyes. By the time he reached the triple bar G, there was warmth in his chest he hadn't felt in a long time. But the next few days were torture. He tried to focus on ranch work, but everything reminded him of Irene. The way she'd moved beside him. The sound of her laugh. The soft steadiness of her hand on his shoulder. He told himself she'd probably forgotten the whole thing already. He told himself it was a one-time act of kindness. But every night he found himself staring at the road toward Trout Creek. On the third afternoon, he gave up pretending. He rolled himself into the wagon and told the foreman he was checking the north pasture. The foreman nodded, though his eyes said clearly he didn't believe a word of it. Justice didn't care. He steered the wagon straight toward Irene's cabin. When he arrived, he froze. The cabin looked smaller in daylight, poorer, a little broken around the edges. The porch sagged. The woodpile was low. A few chickens pecked at the dust. And suddenly Justice wondered if he'd made a mistake. What if she didn't want him here? What if she thought he was foolish? What if she regretted everything? The doubts crushed the breath out of him. He almost turned the wagon around. But before he could, the door opened. Irene stepped outside, wiping flour from her hands. When her eyes found Justice, surprise crossed her face. But then something else replaced it. Warmth. Real warmth. Not pity, not obligation. Pure, simple gladness. "Justice," she said, her voice brightening. "What a wonderful surprise." His fear melted like snow in spring sunlight. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said carefully. "No," she said. "You're not." She stepped closer. "Would you like to come in?" Justice hesitated, looking at the steps leading into the cabin, but Irene was already beside him, her hands gentle on the back of his chair. "Let me help," she said softly. "Please." Justice didn't argue. For the first time in a long, long while, he let someone in. And as she pushed his chair toward the warm glow of her home, something in his heart, something broken and cold and abandoned for far too long, began to wake. Warmth wrapped around Justice the moment he entered Irene's cabin. The place was small, only one room with a little bedroom off to the side, but it felt alive. The smell of bread baking, mixed with the faint scent of pine from the fire crackling in the stove. A patched quilt hung on the wall. A wooden horse Terry had carved sat proudly on the table. Everything felt cared for. "Ma, is it him?" Terry burst from behind the curtain, his face lighting up like sunrise. "Mr. Garrett!" Justice felt something loosen in his chest. "Good to see you, son." Terry ran straight to him. "Are you staying for supper? Ma made stew. It's real good." "Terry," Irene warned gently. "Mr. Garrett might have other plans." But Justice shook his head. "I'd like to stay, if it's no trouble." Irene hesitated only a moment before smiling, soft, shy, and full of something he didn't dare name yet. "Then we'd be glad to have you." They ate at the small table, knees almost touching. Justice had eaten finer meals in San Francisco hotels, meals prepared by trained chefs, but nothing tasted as good as that stew. Maybe it was the laughter. Maybe it was the gentle bump of Irene's elbow against his. Maybe it was the way Terry told stories like, each one might be the most important tale in Montana. After supper, Irene washed the dishes and Justice watched her quietly. There was strength in the way she moved. Not loud strength. Quiet strength. The kind built from years of surviving hard days. The kind he respected more than anything. "You work too hard," he said softly. Irene glanced back with a smile. "I work because I must, same as anyone." "Let me help," Justice said. She looked at him, surprised. "You want to?" "I do." So she dried the dishes while he held the towel. Terry hummed to himself, playing on the floor. For the first time in 18 months, Justice didn't feel like a burden. He felt like part of something. Something he wasn't sure he deserved, but wanted more than he had ever wanted anything. When the dishes were done, the cabin fell into a warm quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like home. Irene sat on the edge of a chair across from him. He sat in his chair, hands resting on his knees, not knowing where to start. "Justice," she said softly, as if reading his thoughts. "Why did you come back?" He took a slow breath. "Because I couldn't stop thinking about you, about the dance, about how you made me feel like a man again." Her hands tightened around each other. "You don't need me to be a man." "No," Justice said, "but I've been alone a long time, lonely. And when I'm with you, that loneliness quiets down." Irene's eyes flickered, full of something warm and scared at the same time. "I know loneliness. I have lived with it since my husband passed, and even before that, if I'm honest." She paused. "The night of the wedding, when I looked at you, I saw someone who understood." Justice's breath caught. "Irene, would it be all right if I came by again?" He swallowed. "Often?" Terry looked up from the floor. "You should, Mr. Garrett. I like when you're here." Ma smiles more. "Terry!" Irene gasped, face turning pink. Justice laughed softly, and Irene's expression softened into something tender. "Yes," she whispered. "You can come, as often as you want." From that day on, Justice visited every chance he got. Some days he brought small things: bread from town, nails for repairs, a new blanket for Terry. Irene scolded him gently, saying they didn't need gifts, but she always blushed when she said it. Other days he came with nothing but himself. They talked for hours. She told him stories of her childhood near the Missouri River. He told her about learning to rope and ride before he was tall enough to see over the corral fence. Terry played near their feet while they talked, drifting between them like he already understood something important was forming. One cold November afternoon, Justice arrived to find Irene outside splitting wood. She looked tired, her breath forming white clouds in the air. Without a word, he rolled toward her. "I'll do it," he said. She shook her head. "Justice, you can't." "Let me," he insisted. So she stepped behind him, wrapped her hands over his, and guided his grip on the axe handle. Together they swung. Together they split the wood. When the log cracked open, they both froze, close, too close, breathing the same cold air. "Irene," he whispered, her eyes lifted to his. For a moment, the entire world went still. But then Terry's voice rang from inside the cabin. "Ma, the soup is boiling." Irene stepped back quickly, cheeks flushed. "I should go check that." Quote. Justice nodded, though every part of him ached with the nearness they'd shared. 2 days later, he gathered his courage. He arrived just before sunset. Irene was stirring a pot on the stove, the firelight making her hair glow like warm amber. Justice rolled closer, heart pounding. "I came to ask you something," he said. She turned, startled by the seriousness in his tone. "What is it?" Quote. Justice swallowed. "Irene, would you allow me to court you?" "Properly?" Her breath caught. Her hand gripped the edge of the counter. Tears filled her eyes before she could blink them away. "I never thought anyone would ask me that again," she whispered. "I'm asking," Justice said gently, "not because I pity you, but because I—" He stopped, unable to say the rest aloud. It felt too big, too raw, but Irene understood anyway. She stepped toward him slowly, like a woman approaching something delicate and precious. She placed her hand on his cheek. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Justice. You may." Relief and joy hit him so hard, he had to close his eyes. Terry peeked from behind the curtain, grinning wide. "Does this mean you'll be family?" Justice laughed, a deep, full laugh he hadn't heard from himself in years. "If your ma wants that someday." "I do," Irene said softly. "I do want that someday." Justice lifted her hand and kissed it. Outside, the Montana sunset washed the sky in gold and pink. Inside the cabin, Irene stepped closer, her forehead resting gently against his. They stayed like that, quiet, close, a cowboy in a chair, and a widow with a brave heart. Two lonely people who had found each other against all odds. Some endings come with thunder and gunfire, but some of the best ones begin with 4 simple words spoken at a wedding. "Dance with me."